trying to cover the most important subject these days, which is housing and affordable housing and how to find affordable housing. Section 8, more specific to many of our clients. There's no Section 8 open in our area, but there's different areas that is, they're open for Section 8 and different programs. My name is Tehani Jabaran. I'm the director of the social services, for those who do not know me. Inshallah, we'll open the Q&A, questions and answers, toward the ending, or maybe after each speaker's session, you would be given the chance to ask some questions. Anyone who needs Arabic translation, please raise your hand before we start. Okay, so we're all set. We thank Ms. Amy Garcia from CSP for joining us today. We thank Ms. Laura Woody, the director of the Family Shelter House Next Door, for joining us, and Ms. Edwina Jackson from the Domestic Violence Shelter. We will start with Ms. Amy Garcia, and we'll do this as short and quick, to the point, for many of you to find resources. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Amy Garcia, and I am from Coordinated Services Planning. I am in the Region 2 office, which is in Annandale at the Heritage Center. We have 3 other regional offices. We have an office in Fairfax in the Panino building. We have an office in Reston in the Lake Ann building. And then we have another office located in Alexandria in the South County Government Center. Each of our offices is going to have a social service supervisor, which is my position. We also have another supervisory position who is a specialist 3. And then we have up to 9 specialists that answer in our call center. And our call center is open Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30. And our specialists receive calls from throughout Fairfax County, and the call will roll to whomever is available first. So it's important for our specialists to be familiar with resources throughout Fairfax County, not just in the regional office where they're located. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the language capability that our staff has, we have on staff people that speak Amharic, Dari, Farsi, Hindi, Italian, Korean, Pashto, Punjabi, Somali, Spanish, Swedish, Tigrinya, and Urdu. And then for all of the other languages, we use interpreter services, so we're assured of being able to communicate with the family or the individual that we're working with. To give you a sense of what happens when a caller contacts Coordinated Services for an emergency need, we will do what is called a broad-based assessment. And the purpose of the broad-based assessment is to become familiar with what the individual or the family situation is, so that we can have the opportunity to connect them with resources in the community that would be appropriate to be able to support them. Some of the partners that we work with are county government offices. We also partner with the faith community. We also partner with community-based organizations to be able to meet the needs of the individuals that we speak with. Typically, when someone calls Coordinated Services, we speak with them for somewhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes, really depending upon the size of the family or the needs that the family might be experiencing. So we will speak with them about things that are related to demographics, whether they have access to health insurance or health care. We'll be speaking with them about their expenses and about their employment history. We'll talk with them about their rental history to get a sense of what their housing has been like. We'll also speak with them about what their strengths are and what their support system is. Oftentimes when people are in the midst of crises, it's difficult for them to remember what their strength is, what they do really well, and so we really like to try to remind people of that and remind them of their support network. Sometimes people can be pretty isolated But we like to talk through, is there a neighbor, is there a friend, or is there someone in the school system that, their family is connected to? And we'll ask about, their relationships. We'll ask about, how the children are doing in school. And we'll also ask about, their partner relationships. Are there any challenges? Are they able to manage their own finances? Are they able to go the places they need to go, so that we are assured of being able to connect them to the appropriate resources? And then we also talk with them about whether there may be any substance abuse issues, to be able to, again, make sure that we maximize that opportunity to get them connected to the most appropriate resources. Many times when people call us, they will ask for something that they feel safe asking for. They may begin with something like food, but we know from our experience that if they're needing food assistance, there are other needs in the family going on, and so that's the purpose of doing that broad-based assessment. Typically, we receive somewhere in the range of 347 calls each day, so it is quite busy. But we try to have the philosophy of where our client is the person that we're speaking to at that moment. And so we really try to be present with them in the moment and be able to explain things to them in a way that they feel comfortable. And we partner with them to work on their service plan to determine what are their goals in terms of their self-sufficiency and how can we partner with them to be able to accomplish that. I know today you're talking about specifically housing, and so our role in coordinated services planning is to try to help with those emergency needs. So there are times where we will partner with the community organizations, the faith community, to be able to assist on a one-time emergency basis with the rental needs. Part of our evaluation when we are doing that is determine what the sustainability is for that individual. So if they're to have that financial assistance, we want to be sure that there will be sufficient income in the household going forward so that they would be able to consistently maintain it and not be in jeopardy of losing the housing. And we know that Fairfax County is a very expensive place to live, and so lots of families are having challenges with making decisions between what am I going to spend my money on? Am I going to spend it on the utilities, or do I spend it on food, or do I spend it on medication? We understand that families are making really difficult choices, and so that's, again, the importance of us being able to connect them with resources in the community to be able to support some of those other needs so that they can gear their finances toward maintaining that housing. In those instances where someone has lost housing, is without housing, our organization's role is to do that initial assessment to see if they would be eligible for homeless services. We want to, before they even get to homeless services, we would like to see if there is anything that can be done to preserve the housing. That's not always possible, but that's the first goal, to try to be able to do that. And so if it's appropriate for us to send the referral to homeless services for the preservation services, or in some situations there are no other resources and individuals would need to go into shelter, we would be sending that referral to the homeless shelter, and then the homeless shelter will go from there and do further assessment and make determinations. But just to make that clear, what our role is in that process. And I think those were the main things that we wanted to touch on. Were there any questions? Oh, that's a good question. No. Each of our specialists do certainly maintain a caseload of clients that they are currently working with, but they have assigned times where they are taking incoming calls. So they would be, during that time, only take incoming calls and get brand new cases, as they are at the same time working on the cases they got the previous day. Or sometimes we're holding on to cases a little bit longer because the resources in the community can run out, and we may need to hold cases a little bit longer before we can satisfy the outstanding financial need. Certainly, we are very conscious of the time constraints with, different kinds of cases that we have, with, whether it be someone that might be having an eviction upcoming, or whether someone may be in jeopardy of losing their housing by a certain date. So yes, we certainly do keep track of that information. And it's always important to encourage clients to make sure that if something in their circumstances has changed, if something is new, a new barrier has presented itself, always encourage them to be able to communicate that information to their specialist. It's very important to do that because we need to be able to react to the most current information. That's a good question. Certainly, when part of our work with our clients is to be able to speak with whomever are the providers that they're working directly with. So we certainly would have that conversation. We are going to see whether the housing can be preserved. There are some times where the landlord is not willing to accept funds from us, and that really does tie our hands in terms of what we can do. But in those situations where they are willing to accept a third-party payment and they are understanding of, what the emergent situation is for that family, and we can give assurances that they will have sufficient income going forward, and some of the supportive things that are put in place to help them to be successful, we certainly do communicate with landlords to do that. It really depends upon when in their continuum they've come to us, because sometimes it's at the very end after many different things have been exhausted and the landlord may be at a place where they may not be able to afford to continue to allow the situation to unfold that way because they have their own financial obligations as well. I recently had a client that was working with a landlord, and it was a fairly new landlord, maybe within a couple of months, but she was extremely understanding. She acknowledged, she said, she's working really hard. I want to set up a repayment arrangement to allow her to pay a little bit until all is satisfied, which, that's unusual that someone is willing to do that, but there are those landlords that are very invested in the person and want to see them be successful. Yes, the Sheriff's Department really does have an excellent timeline in terms of, on their website, of what the eviction process is. I can look that up for you and definitely share that with you. But essentially, someone cannot be evicted just because a landlord says, I want you out at said date. You have to go through the court procedures. So there's going to be a court date, and it's very, very important that families, individuals, go to the court to be able to hear what it is that the judge has to say about whether the housing is going to be, the possession of the housing is given to the landlord, or whether there's an opportunity for a continuance for them to be able to, say that they are working with said organizations to be able to satisfy the debt that is owed. So all of that process is really, really important for our clients to be able to participate in. And then if the property owner is awarded possession of that unit, then even then there's still more time, because the sheriff has to come, post the eviction notice, and that eviction notice is going to say the date and how much time that they're going to have before they are evicted. So there's education, there's information along every step of the process, so it's really important that people... It's on the Fairfax County Sheriff's site, and I will look that up for you because it goes step by step, line by line, and often people aren't aware of what their rights are. So another good resource in terms of that would be landlord-tenant relations. Sometimes people aren't familiar with what their rights are, and so if the landlord says get out, well, they're packing and getting out, and they've never gone through the court procedures. So it's important to also make that connection with folks as well. Right, they can file, but again, they're going to have to go through the whole court process. So sometimes people get afraid, and understandably so. If you're not familiar with what the process is, you would think, okay, well, they gave me this 5-day pay or quit notice, for instance. That's the notice at the very beginning, the first time you're late. That doesn't mean that you have to vacate the premises, but often people will see that piece of paper and say, I have to be out in 5 days, and that's not what that means. So all of those things are important. And that's an excellent point, because oftentimes people are fearful of saying anything to the landlord because they think in the silence it would be better if they just try to figure it out and then come with the final answer. But it's helpful to know that someone is in the process of working on it, because then that shows a good faith effort, that you're doing what you can to be able to try to satisfy the debt. You acknowledge your debt and that you're working toward it. The question was that sometimes families are in one dwelling, multiple families are in one dwelling, and is there anything that can be done in terms of the zoning regulations? Did I understand your question? I think that in terms of kind of the private dwellings that individuals have, I don't know that there's tremendous oversight in terms of going from door to door to see how many people are in a household. I think where that issue comes up more often might be in public housing or Section 8, where there are very specific federal guidelines in terms of housing requirements, how many people can be in a home. And so in those instances, yes, that is a lot more strict. Typically, a family can have a visitor for up to 14 days if they provide notification to housing about that, but they are not allowed to have additional people stay with them for extended periods of time. Thank you very much.
So Amy gave a great introduction to how folks come to services through the homeless services providers. So at Patrick Henry and at the other family shelters and single shelters, all of our referrals come through coordinated services planning. So often folks think that the best way to access shelter is to show up at a shelter. And you can do that, but we will tell you you need to get a referral from coordinated services planning, and you do that by calling their phone number, and I think it's on all of the information that Amy brought. So as she mentioned, CSP works very hard to prevent homelessness for most of the folks that come through their calls. So we don't get anywhere near 347 calls a day. Usually we get a couple of referrals a week for folks requesting homeless services. Another myth that I would like to dispel is that the CSP referral means shelter. We're working very hard in Fairfax County to prevent all of you and anyone from ever having to come into shelter. We believe that shelter is the last resort, and our best option is to provide the same level of services in the shelter and outside of the shelter to help you avoid ever having to come. So that means we're doing a lot of work to prevent folks from becoming homeless. So as Amy mentioned, they have a lot of agency partners that help provide some, maybe paying off back rent and helping stabilize housing. The homeless service system is often able to help with a little bit more money. So if your landlord has waited for 5 or 6 months, hopefully not that long, but if you have a greater amount of money due to a landlord, we may be able to assist you in paying those arrears off. The other things that we do to help folks prevent having to come to shelter is talk to landlords and educate them on the fact that we are trying to help. We do a lot of work to anyone who comes to services at any of the shelters are going to be assigned to a case manager, and that case manager will do whatever they can, contacting the landlord, contacting your friends and family to see if anyone in your network of people can help you in the meantime while we work with you to increase your income, find other housing options, any of that. This is the same type of work that we would be doing in shelter, but we're working to make sure that your family does not have to experience coming to a shelter. So if we get to a point where we aren't able to find any other options, your landlord won't work with you, you aren't able to locate other housing, your friends or family won't take you, what we will do is admit you into shelter. Patrick Henry and the other family shelters in Fairfax County are 30-day shelters. That means that our goal is to very, very quickly get you back into housing. What we use is a model called rapid rehousing. Has anyone heard of rapid rehousing? rapid rehousing. So rapid rehousing is a nationally recognized model, and it works with most folks who come for services at a shelter. Basically, the premise is that most people just need a little bit of assistance, a little bit of case management, a little bit of financial assistance, a little bit of follow-up to get stable back into housing. So rapid rehousing helps locate housing options, helps secure that housing option through financial assistance, and then provides you case management once you're in housing to work on some of those barriers like lack of income or lack of resources. So really, the shelter is, we hope that you don't have to stay there very long. We believe that people stabilize better in their own housing. But sort of the catch here is that most of that housing is market rate housing. So I have a little paper up here that says what the fair market rent is in Fairfax County. So fair market rent is really just the government's cap on what they think is affordable and the amount of rent that we can help provide assistance to. So for a 2-bedroom in this county, the amount is $1,623. A lot of places, if not most places, cost more than that for a 2-bedroom. So what we're doing often is educating folks on what their options are, not just in Fairfax County, but outside of the county, and even outside of the state. So we have housing options in Fredericksburg. We might explore something in Fredericksburg. We might talk to folks about moving to Roanoke, where they have some public or project-based subsidized housing with very little wait. In Fairfax County, the Housing Choice Voucher or the Section 8 voucher waiting list is closed. The option for finding subsidized housing, which is 30% of your income in Fairfax County, is nearly impossible. So if folks, we try to do some education with people who come into shelter about really looking at your budget. You can pay 90% of your income to afford a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in Fairfax County, or you can move to Fredericksburg or Roanoke and pay more like 40 or 50% of your income to get the same type of housing. So often it's just a conversation about what do you want your lifestyle to look like? Is it more important for you to stay here in Fairfax where things are so expensive, or more important that you have a little bit more wiggle room in your budget to be able to provide for your family and have a little fun every once in a while? So we have those kind of very serious conversations with folks. I wanted to talk a little bit about what you can do to avoid having to come to shelter. And one of the biggest things that I think is not a lot of time, but might save you a lot of pain in the long run, is applying for, there are waiting lists across the country for the Housing Choice Voucher, the Section 8 voucher, and I've included the website that you can look at to find what those localities are. I'll give you an example. We had a family come recently who we were able to prevent them from coming to the shelter. They stayed with family for a little bit of time, but we were able to help them relocate to Minnesota. Why would anyone want to go to Minnesota? I'll tell you one reason. No waiting for Section 8. We were able to assist this family, a very large family, in securing a 3-bedroom house for $950. We were able to pay 3 months of rent. The moment she arrived, we were able to fill in her application for Section 8. We talked to them there. No problems. If you're a resident, you're eligible. The wait list is about 2-3 months, so by the time our subsidy ends, very likely, if not 100% likely, her voucher will be up and running. That will not happen in Fairfax County, period. It will not happen. So those are the options that we talk about with families in shelter. I would recommend that you spend the 20 minutes to an hour to apply at these different localities. Most of the time, if you're in a subsidized housing choice voucher situation for at least 1 year, you can port that voucher. If you're in good standing, you're paying your rent, your landlord is happy, after your initial lease of 1 year, you can move that voucher back to Fairfax County or to anywhere in the country. You can move to Hawaii if you want to. you just need to stay in Minnesota for 1 year and be able to have that voucher for the rest of your life. So I included the link to the list where they update who has openings across the country on the sheet that's up here. I also included a couple of links to the housing options that Fairfax County does have available. They do have some rental properties that are lower rent, and by lower I mean probably closer to this fair market rent. Those buildings often have waiting lists, and the subsidy or the reduced rent is specific to that one building, so you have to go and apply at each of the different buildings. Most of the folks who exit shelter, about 75%, do exit to permanent housing, but the vast majority of those folks are exiting to market rate housing, many of them paying between $1,000 and $1,500 for a 2-bedroom in Fairfax. So we're able to provide some rental assistance for a month, maybe 2, to get you in the door, but the goal really is for this housing to be yours. So we would work with you in terms of case management to find employment, increase employment, find resources, help you connect to places like Tahani, and make sure that you have some social support so that you can spend all of your money on your rent and be able to provide for your family in other ways using other resources. I hope that I never have to see any of you at my shelter. Any questions? So her question was, how much money do we have? Where do we get that money? And when do we run out? What happens when we run out? I have been at Patrick Henry for about a year now, and we've never run out of funding. We get our funding through a couple of different sources. One is Emergency Services Grant, which is a federal funding stream. That is all of our funding is very particular, and there are specific requirements such as income has to be under a certain guideline. The housing that we find has to be under this fair market rent. You do have to re-qualify after 3 months, which normally we're not helping with more than 3 months. Generally, we help with deposit and first month's rent and work very quickly to get you employment so that you can be self-sufficient. So I don't have an amount of money that we have, but generally we help folks. I mean, it depends. If your rent is $1,500, we'll probably help you with at least $3,000 to get into the door. And that rent goes directly to your landlord. Generally speaking, no. They would not need to be turned away from lack of funding. They may be turned away because their income is too high, but even then we work to try to figure out other options. We may then refer back to CSP to see if there's something that they can do through a private agency. We may be able to negotiate with the landlord to make a payment plan for a deposit. We try everything we can to get landlords to work with us. Yes, ma'am. So her question was about, yes, absolutely. Her question was, is it really true that you can move to Minnesota and live there for a year and keep your voucher and have it for the rest of your life? And also, say it again, I already forgot. Undocumented and non-citizens, what are the options for them? So to answer the first question, yes. As long as you're in good standing with your landlord, you're paying your rent, and your voucher has portability, which I believe that most of them do for Section 8, which is called the Housing Choice Voucher now, HCV. As long as you're in good standing with your landlord and you can find a locality that will accept your voucher, you can move it after that year. So it's true. In terms of undocumented and folks without citizenship, I am not 100% certain on the requirements for Housing Choice Voucher. Do you have to be a citizen? Undocumented, I know. So I'll repeat that for the YouTube viewers. The Housing Choice Voucher is for citizens and those who are documented. If you are a non-citizen who has children who are citizens, I believe there's a way that they prorate the voucher. I'm not an expert. I don't know how that works. I would say that it shouldn't be a you should still apply and put your application in if your children are citizens, but they will have to prorate the amount of support that they can offer. For folks who are undocumented and non-citizens, what we usually do is, for non-citizens, it's less of an issue in terms of private market or fair market or private market housing. For those who are undocumented, really we're working with private landlords who own maybe a basement or an apartment, but they're privately owned. These landlords often, really that's what we work with the most. Most of those landlords are more willing to take folks who have barriers, and by barriers I mean evictions, poor credit, criminal background, maybe that undocumented piece, no income. We do have landlords who will rent to our clients with zero income. Most of the time, that means that we sort of sell ourselves to the landlord by saying, we are going to support this family, and we will help them find employment and find the resources they need to maintain this housing. That does not mean that we are going to pay your rent forever. Really, I mean it. We will probably only pay 1 or 2 months at the most, because this is your housing, and we want you to sustain it. So again, it's tough choices about if I want to stay in Fairfax, am I prepared in 2 months or even 1 month to spend $1,500 a month on my rent? And if the answer to that is no, then the doors are wide open to figure out where you can go that you can afford. And Minnesota might be a great option. Rent is much cheaper there. As far as I know, you would just need to apply there. You don't have to do anything through Fairfax. So the website on this paper gives you an idea of, I think right now Bristow, Virginia has availability for Section 8. So the waiting list is still a couple of months. It's called Bristow, Virginia. So again, I would say take the time to look at this website today if you think that in the future subsidized housing might be an option for you, knowing that you may have to move somewhere else, but that eventually you might be able to come back and bring that voucher with you to live here. Bristow, Virginia has an open Section 8 waiting list right now, to my knowledge. I think Charlottesville, Virginia recently had their list open. There's a couple of places in West Virginia that have an open waiting list. So it's by locality. It makes sense. The question was, why is the federal government not giving places like us more money, and why are they giving random places like Minnesota money to provide housing choice vouchers? If I knew what was going on in HUD's mind, a lot of things would change, let me tell you that. I do believe that we probably get much more funding than Minnesota does. But hey, I'm from Minnesota, and it's pretty nice there. So there are folks that want to live there, as long as you don't mind the cold. It's a hidden gem of the United States. So I will come to you, what I don't know. So the person who moved to Minnesota, she did have to secure housing in Minnesota first. So she was able to find agencies that could help pay for her rent and help her get there, which is not going to happen for everybody. If you want to relocate, you may need to start saving up your pennies. But the rent was $950 for a 3-bedroom. So I think she had 6 people in her family and was able to move into a 3-bedroom for $950 without a lot of question from the landlord. And once she had residency there, a lease in her hand, she was able to apply for the voucher. So she's currently in the waiting process. She just moved there last week. But so it does take some planning and some saving. That was the other thing I wanted to mention. I think one of the other ways to avoid coming to shelter and needing our services is saving your money, even a few dollars a month, coming to a place like this where you can build a social network. I feel like a lot of the folks that come to us from shelter, into shelter, are folks who don't have that many social supports and don't have family or friends they can call on to say, hey, I need to stay here. I need a little bit of help. So make friends, help each other. That's one of the biggest ways that we've seen success, is people being able to move in with family or friends and find stability that way. Sure. Generally, it's 30%. I think sometimes it's going up to 35% that you pay of your income. So, for example, If this woman's income is 0 at time of application, unless there are specific, and I don't think there usually are for the housing choice voucher, specific requirements around employment, but again, I don't think that that's the case for the housing choice voucher, your rent would be 0. 30% of 0 is 0. I would encourage you that you don't want your income to be 0 and try to, find that, but generally it covers 30% of your income. So it would have to stay within the fair market guidelines for whatever jurisdiction that you're in. So for Winona, Minnesota, the fair market rent is much lower than it is here. Our rents are very inflated, so the amount that they will cover is higher, but it depends on the locality. And if you Google fair market rent in Minnesota, it should come up with a grid that's very similar to the one that I have here that's for Fairfax County. It depends on the landlord. So she asked if it's specific places that you can rent from. The landlord does have to be willing to accept your housing choice voucher, and there are many landlords that don't. You'll have to look at the website. I am not familiar with anything beyond Minnesota, and it doesn't just go by state, it goes by locality. So for example, Fairfax County has its own pool of housing choice vouchers. So it goes by, the housing choice vouchers go by locality. So you're not applying to Minnesota, you're applying to Carver County, Minnesota. So it's, the HUD gives money to different localities. So you're applying at different, it might be Honolulu, Hawaii may have openings, but Maui doesn't. So it depends on localities. Housing choice voucher is Section 8. Section 8 is, it used to be Section 8, it is now called housing choice voucher. Correct. So she asked if you find a place that's over the fair market value, if they will let you pay the difference, and the answer is no. It must be under fair market rent. I would look at the website and see which localities, because they should have criteria for what they require. I would say I think that many of the folks that are coming to us for services are low income and would qualify. I just know that there are waiting lists. So if there's an open waiting list and you have any interest in moving to Winona, Minnesota, or wherever it is, I would recommend applying and seeing what happens, because who knows, in 5 months, if your situation changes, you may be very thankful that you took the 20 minutes to put in the application today. So if you're open to moving, it might be good to start investigating now where you'd want to go. I'm an expert at helping people find affordable housing around here for the most part. You will need to look at that website and see what the requirements are, unless one of my colleagues knows. Usually there are some criteria for folks with higher barriers. On the paper that I brought as well, I included a link for Fairfax County, like I mentioned, and I just pulled up their housing choice. Now, again, their waiting list is closed, period, it's closed. But they do have some local preferences, so you have to meet all of those preferences, including a working preference, so you're either employed at least 20 hours a week in Fairfax County, or meet HUD's definition of disabled, a residency preference, a rent burden preference, so that you're paying more than 30% of your income on your rent and utilities, etc. And they do have some income requirements. So I would imagine that throughout the country there are some other similar preferences like that for Section 8 housing choice voucher. I know that we had one family that moved there successfully. I would recommend that you look at that website. They open, different localities open and close whenever the wind moves them to do so. So you would have to look specifically at each locality. Right, exactly. So Minneapolis probably wouldn't have the openings. Winona, I think it was Carver County, had the openings. What we do say to folks who come into shelter is that housing choice voucher, or subsidized housing, or transitional housing, or project-based Section 8 housing is not a plan to exit shelter. That is a long-term plan. Our plan, if you come to shelter, will be to locate market rate housing in whatever locality you want to move or live in. So if it is Fairfax, we will help you find as cheap of housing that we can in Fairfax County, but the rent will be yours, the lease will be yours. So again, these are steps that this HCV voucher conversation that we're talking about is preventative so that you don't have to come to shelter and have that conversation with me that says, it's really expensive to live in Fairfax County. Are you sure you want to spend 90% of your income to stay in this county, or are you willing to look elsewhere? But again, we're a 30-day shelter. So waiting for public housing or subsidized housing is simply not a plan for exiting shelter. It will not happen in 30 days.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. So now we'll move forward and we'll have Ms. Edwina Jackson. She's with the domestic violence shelter. I know many of our cases that come to our office are domestic violence related, but we can actually bring to your attention some of the steps of how to seek their services, as well as many of your questions. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Edwina, and I have with me Bobby. Bobby is, you can say what you.
So I work at Artemis House. We are an emergency domestic violence shelter. We are the only emergency domestic violence shelter in Fairfax County. So what we do is we service anyone who's experiencing sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking. And our program is a 45-day program. When you enter our program, you are assigned a case manager that will help you kind of overcome any barriers that you're facing. We also have an employment specialist and a housing specialist that works with you to find employment and find affordable housing. We work very closely with coordinated services also. In case we don't have the resources to support you, we do reach out to other community resources to make sure that when you do exit our program, that you are supported outside as well as inside of our program.
And to piggyback off of what Bobby just said, my role has changed a little bit. I was the program director for domestic violence supportive housing, which was a transitional housing program that was recently defunded by HUD. So we are in the challenging position of trying to get folks out of our units and to try to find them market rate housing in this area or outside of the area, wherever they can afford. Now, the reason why I'm still here standing and talking because I have a job is that I am now in a new role of program manager of rapid rehousing. What's her name again? I just forgot. Laura, sorry. Just talked a little bit about rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is like what she said, where we're trying to put you in your own unit. Normally it's an apartment, it could be a townhouse, whatever it is you're able to afford, but usually apartment rates are the rental rates that most folks can afford. Even though they have up to 2 months of rental assistance, ours is a little bit longer. We can do up to 6 months, maybe even a year. But the ticker of that is, we prioritize those that have DV, domestic violence, and then they usually will come from Artemis House. So that's why we're piggybacking up here a little bit. So for the women that may come into other families, it's not just women, it could be men too, men with their children, but it's families. When they come into Artemis House, and then we will have to do an assessment to see if they're working, if they're not working, what's going on. But there's no barriers. If they have substance abuse, if they're working or not, we are still able to rehouse them. We get most of our money from HUD, the rapid rehousing from is from HUD, and then there's the Begun Foundation, which we also are getting monies from as well. So between those two programs, we're able to house folks a little bit longer, and it will look different, person to person, family to family. We may be able to house, for example, one family, it can be for a year, but the assistance will look different. So for a year, they can stay in the unit and it'll be in their name. The lease will be in their name, and it's expected that they're able to either obtain a job or increase their employment to be able to afford the rent. So we may pay 6 months of rent for someone. We may pay $400 a month because that's what they're short for 6 months for someone. We may pay 3 months and plus security deposit for someone. So family to family, it will be different. And it just depends on where you're at. If you come into the program and you're not working, we may even pay your rent for 5 months to give you an opportunity to find a job. And then we will start to tier down. So we'll pay your rent for a portion of time, and then after that, we'll start paying 95%, you're paying 5. And then we may pay 50% and you're paying 50, and then we'll phase out. So that way, you're kind of not just going into shock with going from 0 to paying $1,500 a month. You're kind of gradually having the opportunity to increase your income or to gain employment. So that's what the rapid rehousing program was. I wanted to piggyback a little bit off what you said, ma'am, about the Arlington, which we actually just had. We had actually a client that we did pay for her to go. She has to be in Arlington, I think, for 6 months. I think that may have been the residency. So we paid 3 months of rent for her. She had her own 3 months of rent. Now she was able to get the grant, the Arlington grant. So it does work. It is there. You're absolutely right about that. And just to piggyback a little bit off of, I think another question was about the Section 8 subsidy. It's a long-term goal. But there's also some stipulations to it. It's not very easy to obtain either. Even when you do apply, there's still things that could be barriers that may make it difficult for you to obtain a unit. If you still have to have decent credit. I've had clients that have obtained the voucher, and they took them forever. I mean, we actually had to go through private landlords and kind of advocate on my client's behalf because their credit was so bad that no one would take them, and they had the voucher. So that's meaning that the government was going to pay, or the county was going to pay a certain percent, 70 whatever percent of their rent for a portion of time, until depending on their income, and they only had to pay the 30, but nonetheless they still couldn't get into the unit because the credit was bad, or their background was maybe they had something horrific in the background. So when they do background checks, so we do use a lot of private landlords, because we're able to work with them a little bit better. We're able to advocate for them. Complexes, apartment complexes, they have their own rules and regulations. They don't care about Section 8. They don't care about HUD. They don't care about any of that. They just want to get their units filled, and they want to get them filled with people who are going to pay their rent and don't have, whatever, meet their guidelines for whatever the background is and meet their guidelines for credit. Once you're approved through them, you're approved through them. But if you can't get approved through them, where do you live? Where do you go? So that's when trying to find rooms for rent, private landlords come into play, and we have to be very creative in how we're trying to find housing for our clients, because there are issues sometimes. There are some credit histories or challenges. There are some background issues or concerns, and sometimes there's substance abuse and mental health that all coupled together. So we're trying to find the right placements for folks to live so that they and their families can thrive. So in short, the rapid rehousing program that I am currently managing, normally we don't take, it's very new, so it's kind of, it'll be some trial and error. And actually we just started, Pauline is one of the new case managers there, and we just actually moved into our new spot, which is confidential, so I can't even say where it's at. I can't even give you an idea where it's at, because most of our clients will be coming from Artemis House, and that's also a confidential location. And actually I set up some materials up here too as well. There are some affordable rentals that are private owned. There's rooms for rent. Most of them are outside of the county because that's where it's affordable, as everybody has said that's come up here. So take a look at all the materials from CSP and what Laura brought as well from, they talked about housing and the fair market rates. So you have an idea. It's good to have an idea of how much things are running now, so you know where do you want to move, where do you want to live. If you have access to a computer, I would suggest getting on there. You can go to the apah.org. That's the Arlington grant. You would go there to get that information. Shelterhouse.org is our information if you want to learn more about Shelter House. You would also learn about all of our programs there as well, and the staff. And then there's the Fairfax County. I think I just wrote it down for somebody. It's Fairfax County. fairfaxcounty.gov. I'll get that back. I'll get that to you in a second once I go back. There's a rehab. I was looking for fairfaxcounty.gov/RHA. And that will give you more information about the Section 8 and the criteria to apply for that. And actually, I did look this morning, and I even saw that Montgomery County, which is just as nice as Fairfax County, they have open vouchers. So I would go today and look to apply. And they were open about 4 or 5 months ago, and then they closed. So now I saw this morning that it was open again, so you need to go there and apply. And West Virginia, it seems like they always have an open wait list. It's far out there, but it's affordable. I think I brought my cards there in my car, so I'll bring my cards in, because yeah, if they want to be a landlord, we do work with landlords, and we do try. For example, Shelter House has 7 units that we own, and so we will be rapidly rehousing folks into our own units, because we have to get folks out of one program into another, and it's just too little time, so it makes sense. And yeah, we always are looking for private owners. We would make a guarantee, but it would depend on the client. So we wouldn't be able to make that guarantee up front, because we don't know what client's going to be housed there. But once we know which client is going to be housed there, we would have done a budget with them. We would have done their rental calculations, and we would have done the program agreement, all that good stuff, so that we know that they're going in that unit, and we would have a better idea of their financial picture, and we would have a better idea of how much assistance they would need from us. And so then they would have to sign off with us on, this is how much assistance we're going to give you, and we promise we're going to give you this to the client, which really would go, because the client won't get the money will go to the landlord, of course, and then they'll have to be responsible for their portion. If there's any portion for them to be responsible for, we maybe pay the whole thing for a certain period of time. But that contract, the landlord will also have that, so they would have a clear understanding. The good thing about when a landlord is working with a program such as us is that you get us. You know, you get that extra support of a case manager or program manager. So if it's too loud, you know, they're making noise, or your tenant is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, whatever the case may be, they have someone they can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, you don't get that with the average tenant. It's just, you know, you have to connect with them, and then eventually start the eviction process, because it keeps happening and happening. We have had move clients before, switch them out in different apartments just because there was a problem with one family in one apartment, and that was the family's issue. They were just upstairs. They had little kids, and the kids are being kids. They're ripping and running, and downstairs there was a woman down there, and she was sensitive to the hearing, to the light, and to the noise. So it was just a lot of confusion. So we didn't want to stress her out anymore. So we swapped clients out, put one in there that was a little bit more quiet, had an older kid. It worked well. So we're very creative when we're trying to find housing and putting clients in certain places. But yes, if you have anybody, we would definitely talk to them, and then we'll give them that picture. And then the good thing too is if that client that's going to be in that tenant, that the person that you recommend, for example, if they're there and they're short term, say they get their income up and they move out in 4 months, well then we have another tenant that can go right in there. So their money will still keep coming. What we will try, what we do try to do is try to match folks up as much as possible. I wouldn't be able to say that we could actually do that, because it would be kind of discrimination. Yeah, we wouldn't be able to do that just because it's just not allowed. It's illegal. Yeah, it's just not allowed. And for example, we've actually have had a Muslim family, and we've had connected them here so that they would have the extra support of the Muslim family here. But when it comes to housing and employment, you can't do that because it's illegal. Yeah, but yeah, I get your point. Can someone in a different jurisdiction apply for housing here? Well, yeah, you can apply for housing anywhere, but if it's a program, or if it's a subsidy, then you may have to live in the county to apply for those. But if you're just trying to go to an apartment complex, yeah, it doesn't matter where you live. You can apply wherever you want to apply. For a program, normally you have to live in the county, and you go through CSP. CSP would be kind of like the catch-all for housing and supportive services. CSP is the catch-all. That's the main number that we always refer clients to. Yes, they would have to go to their worker, whoever their voucher is through. If they're through Arlington County or DC or Maryland, they would need to go through their worker and let them know that they want to move to a different jurisdiction. Now, if they want to move to Virginia, what happens is Virginia has to give up, or say Fairfax County, would have to give up a voucher to receive that person. So that's where it gets a little sticky. You can move anywhere in the country, but wherever you move, you want to double check, make sure that they're going to accept your voucher, because we are each given a certain number of vouchers. So we can't go over that. And they're in the program? Well, if they have if they're housing, they should have someone they can connect with. If they have some kind of a housing voucher or getting some housing support, they should have someone they should be able to connect to. It might have to be their housing agency, like we have, what was it, redevelopment here. I don't know where are they located? DC? Oh, yeah. Right, and if it's project-based, so some vouchers, they're only good for that apartment complex. They're only good there, so then you can't move anywhere. That's only for that unit or that building. But if they have it where they can move around, if they have like a regular HVC, housing choice, HCV, housing choice voucher, if they have that and they can move around, then they should definitely have somebody that they can connect with. Even if it's project-based, they have to have someone got them in there. So they have to be somebody they can connect with.
If they want, we can talk after we're finished privately, because, I know confidentiality purposes. So just let them know if they want to talk to us after we're finished here privately, they're more than welcome, and we'll give them all the information they need.
I believe Laura already said that if you can just go on the computer and apply. And then you don't have to, you can live here. It's okay to live here, but you have to go on the computer and apply, and it was okay. Yeah, putting your name on the waiting list is totally different than, you have to go through a process. It's still a process. Everything is a process. So you put your name on the waiting list, and once they call you or they connect with you, then you have to go in and do the application, and you do the process, go through the process. And then the part of that process is seeing if you qualify. They're going to check your income. They're going to see if you're a resident or not, and whatever criteria they have. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. For the programs I'm speaking about is for domestic violence. And actually, for the rapid rehousing, we will prioritize victims of domestic violence. So if we have an opening and we put an announcement out and there's not a client that has any DV issues in her history or recent issues, then we can go towards just a person who is going through homelessness, rather than it doesn't have to be specific to DV. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.